Okay. How is everybody today? Very good. I'm seeing nod. Seeing a nod.
Little
Have a
feeling a
client.
little bit like pushed through a sieve, as you mentioned in your handout.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have more and more clients starting to go, gosh, I'm just really tired and I'm feeling weird and I'm feeling this and I'm feeling that. And, we're actually 3.5 weeks out from Mercury in retrograde. So actually almost 4 weeks. Yeah, we're about 4 weeks out. So, it's about a week, probably a week from now, people who are extra sensitive might start feeling it. But I was laying there this morning thinking, oh gosh, I hope it's not one of those that's really going to kick me because there are times when um, it's rare these days, but there are times when it's heavier than normal and it depends, of course, on your astrology and um, who it comes in under, So let me just make sure I'm making my whole marks here. And it's Jen. One's coming in. I think we've got 3 more people coming. So how, I know you said, Donna, that you're feeling like you're getting pushed through a sieve. How do you tend to manage those times?
Just, excuse me, 1 minute at a time.
Good answer.
Ratchet way back.
Good answer. Good answer. Yeah. How's everybody else doing?
Good. I got exciting stuff. I got a son getting married on Friday, and my daughter's
Oh,
here to be the maid of honor, and she just revealed she's pregnant. So all kinds of fun stuff.
nice. Congratulations on both. That's wonderful. You have a lot of activity to look forward to.
Yes, and relatives coming in for it. All kinds of stuff going on.
Good. So a huge party. And hopefully no bad weather or
Yes.
no anything else that's gonna.
So far, it looks clear.
Good. Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. I joke with people, but it's not so much of a joke. Being a psychologist, and you know this too, being a psychologist, but I tell people there's nothing like a birth, a death, and a wedding or a funeral to stir stuff up. So hopefully that won't happen for you at all.
No, everything's pretty quiet in our family. We all get along well, and
Great.
no conflict, no issues.
You hit the jackpot with
I did.
your karmic energy for this lifetime. So
I
that's good.
really did. Absolutely.
Good. And I will tell this story in a minute. I'm just waiting for the others to come in. How about everybody else? How's everybody else doing? I'm seeing gentle nods. Are those hesitant nods?
I'm feeling much lighter than I have in several weeks.
Good. Wonderful. 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 We love hearing that. Yeah. When you come out of it, when you come out of the sieve, sometimes it's like, oh, what a relief. So I'm glad that you're feeling some relief. It's good. Oh, there's Kim and there's Susan. Perfect. I think we just have Junie that we're waiting on. Perfect. Okay, so I have not heard from her that she's not coming, so she might just be getting childcare taken care of for herself. So wow, so this topic can be a fun one and it can be a challenging one. So it just depends on the situation and the person. To me, it's fun because again, like this is way up my alley and I have a lot of fun doing this. Um, I it's my sandbox. I mean, I just love it. So so Mara just said that she's doing swell, but that she's getting floors, I think.
Tomorrow.
Okay, yep, new floors tomorrow. Need to move the last of the things. Okay, so she's just listening at the moment. That's fine. Okay, got it, got it. Okay, so so I'm curious as people kind of read through, well, let me first say this. Is there any leftover anything from the financial piece? Because that, again, that can stir a lot. That brought up some stuff for people. I got some emails in between, just kind of people realizing anything else come up for people that you feel like you want to touch base on. And I have on the PowerPoint, I have a couple more books that I'm going to share with you that are actually very helpful just for the sake of kind of understanding financial concepts. But anything else come up, I just always like to review that before we get started. Okay, so let me want to get to the PowerPoint real quick. Oh, I actually want to dive right in. So what I'm going to do, let me get back here. Let me hit share. And I hit the wrong button. Let me try this again. Okay, I want to dive right in because I want us to lead right in pretty quickly with slideshow from beginning. And then I will keep watching for Ginny to come in. All right, so I want to dive right in, but I want to kind of, so I asked questions about the financial branch. I wanted to add these books. Now, these don't sound very spiritual, and technically they're not. But one of the things I did for myself years ago, and it was extraordinarily helpful, honestly, was to read about like investing because especially as a female, when a lot of the idea is that males should be the ones managing money, years ago, this is probably 15, maybe 20 years ago. And honestly, I can't remember which one I read. I think it was this one. I think it was the Complete Idiot's Guide. I don't think it was this one, but I couldn't remember. I don't have it. I lent it to someone and then they kind of passed it on to someone else. But if you don't understand some of the terminology, these are great books because I'll tell you, especially as a female, well, actually as a male or a female, I don't want to, put a gender label on this, but women in general don't learn about money. It's just not typical, but it is so empowering to understand the language and understand what does it mean? What is a bond? What is a CD? What is this kind of investment? It's just very helpful. And I know that this walked me through like years ago, and I can actually talk semi-intelligently with my financial planner, which is really helpful. So I just wanted to share these because one of the reasons I like the idiot's guides to anything, depending on what they are, is that they have glossaries, they have really basic chapters to follow, they have information that I think is digestible. And especially when it comes to money, I think it's very helpful to know the terminology. So I just wanted to throw these out there. I know I shared 4 or 5 books last time, but I wanted to share this as well. So, all right. My dog is really like restless right now, so I don't know if she's just hot or if she's uncomfortable. So I may have to keep an eye on her. Poor thing, she's older, so she's less comfortable. Okay, so I want to dive right in and ask. Let me move this a little bit. I want to dive right in and ask about the spiritual branch of health questionnaire and kind of what your reactions were, what you thought about. I just kind of want to work through this and then kind of move beyond this a little bit. But tell me, oh, there's Jenny. Perfect. I just want to kind of do this right away so that, we can have some discussion points because I do want to do another journey. And yet, this is a juicy topic in lots of ways. This is one of those topics where people can have wounds, people can have discomfort, people can have multiple different like chapters of their lives and what they believed and kind of how they were taught about spirituality. But I just kind of want to ask, how was it for you to complete this branch questionnaire? And anybody can jump in. I mean, obviously, all of us are. This is part of the reason I think this group is so fun is that everybody's spiritually minded. But, I'm sure we've all come from different backgrounds. And if you watched the videos, you know that I worked for a Catholic convent, which was really fascinating. I actually love ritual. I love, love, love ritual. And ritual comes very like near and dear to me. I loved the ritual of the Catholic churches. I loved the incense. I loved genuflect. I mean, I loved all of it. But for me, what ended up happening, and this was at a very young age, I would zone out when the priest started talking, and I would zone back in when we were ready to kind of get back to the actual activity part of the church. And what I realized later was that I was actually probably meditating from a pretty young age because I would go into this place where I was very much at peace. I actually don't remember hearing much. I just remember being in a very quiet space during that time. And I wasn't daydreaming. I wasn't, thinking about math problems from my school's tests, or I wasn't thinking about any of that. So it was really interesting how my own spirituality developed. And and then, like I said in one of the videos too, I actually ended up working for a Catholic convent for about 4.5, 5 years. When I was in graduate school, I was recruited to work with a brain injured nun as the treatment coordinator. And boy, did I learn a lot about nuns. And I learned a lot about the political nature of how nuns kind of vote for each other as far as when you go up in the mother house. And I mean, it's just fascinating how it all works. So I've had this interesting Catholic background. I've, been on the board of a retreat center locally. Got a tickle in my throat, sorry. Um, they tried to, sorry, I got a tickle. I'm going to try really hard not to cough. Um, but I am going to get a vitamin C drop. Um, so anyway, my own past was kind of interesting with how I evolved, but I would love to hear from someone else, especially as I'm getting a cough drop in my mouth. Those are awfully quiet today.
I'll share. Um, so, um, my spirituality, I think I came out of the closet spiritually. I'll put it that way. When I was co-pastoring a church, Christian church, and could no longer stand up beside the senior pastor while things were said about there's only one path, there's only this, there's only that. And so I realized that I would get really nauseous, very anxious. I started gaining a lot of weight. And so then at some point in that process, some life events happened that created the perfect opportunity for me to resign, which I did. And then I worked to kind of better define myself as an interfaith person. And then I came out of the closet, so to speak.
So how did that change other parts of your life, other branches of your life? Because I think that's really how I want to help weave this together.
Well, I had more money to do things for me because I wasn't giving all my extra money to the church.
Okay. Yep. There
That's
you go.
funny.
Yep.
Um, I, began any spare time looking online or looking for other kinds of events or groups or things that would help me learn. I started taking various spiritually oriented classes, like through Dr. Doreen Virtue. And so then all of those things really helped me to begin to see, I think, the magic, so to speak, of life.
Mhm.
So it changed everything. It changed how I parented my child. It changed what I talked about in therapy, uh, everything.
Wonderful. Yeah, and so that's the thing. And spirituality and sex tend to be branches that can be very triggered for people because they're so near and dear to the person. They're so personalized. And so I think it's important for us to kind of flesh through this a little bit. Anybody else have anything that they want to share from something that shifted for them or an awakening or anything it is that has happened for you to kind of enhance this branch or change this branch for you?
I just got tired of feeling guilty for everything I did, thought, said, it, everything. And I got tired of it. I'm like, you know what? At first it really affected me and it put me in a really dark place. Like I'm this terrible bad person because I feel guilt all the time for everything I do. And I finally was like, but I'm not a bad person. Like what why am I punishing myself? Why am I being punished? Um, and and then some other life events happened and I pulled away from the religious part of it and like Krista said, started to explore more avenues and see that there was so many more things out there and ended up just kind of going with what feels good, which makes more sense. Like, this, it feels right. It feels connected. Does it still challenge me? Yes. Um, you know, uh, am I learning? Yes. But I feel good about it. I don't feel guilty about things.
Mhm.
So that's kind of my spiritual journey there is I just got tired of being bad.
Well, and I've heard many people say this, but if and here's the sort of bullet point with this is that if you feel worse coming out of a church than when you went in, there's something wrong. There is something wrong. And so, I think that is part of kind of the mass exodus is that, if a church situation is in whatever way not aligning with that individual, that's exactly what it is that needs to cue them to look at their spiritual health in general. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, and I'll also say that there got to be questions that I had that the Presbyterian Christian church I was raised in and even the Christian church I was co-pastor of was LGBTQ plus affirming, like a very progressive church. But I began like just having questions that I just never could um, find answers to, like, what Jesus um, actually did and said, compared to all the other things that we hear that aren't even really uh, that are different, right? They're different than maybe what actually
Yeah,
he said or did or the way he approached things.
right.
And I kept hearing the whole, you heal thyself. So then that also shifted things for me because I realized, well, that's also why I didn't fit well being a co-pastor because I was always trying to empower people instead of having them dependent on me or some other minister within the church.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and so I'm gonna bring this back to the psychological branch for a moment because I talked about the difference between self-esteem and integrity. And I want to loop this back for the understanding of, when I talked about that, I talked about the fact of living from the inside out, meaning integrity. So living from the inside out to see what aligned with you versus the outside in, meaning, wow, I'm constantly comparing myself. I'm feeling guilty. I'm feeling shamed. I'm feeling inadequate. I'm feeling whatever. And to me, this goes back to both what Kimberly said as well as Krista is like, well, wait a minute, there's something going on inside of me that's not lining up with what I'm being told from the outside. So, that is that flipping. And then the whole idea of integrity being living from the inside out, that's how we create our own spirituality. So it is like it's all, you can link all of this together in your exploration. And and that's about, that's why I said in one of those videos, it's like, to me, the best definition I've ever heard is that which brings you peace. Because if there's something that doesn't bring you peace, well, okay, maybe there's something that needs to be explored about that. So absolutely. And I'm going to add this, and for me, again, I loved the ritual of the Catholic Church. I never fully believed everything they said, but it was community, it was ritual, it was kind of a routine so I could get quiet every week. Now, but granted, when I got divorced, Catholic churches don't like divorced people unless you get annulments. And for me, it's like, okay, that tells me right there, I don't fit here. And so it was a pretty easy decision. But that did not mean at all that I gave up spirituality. What it meant was that I just expanded it, kind of like probably what most of you have done. And I think that's again that developing your own, kind of belief system. And that's why spirituality is so hard to define. Because if there's 8.6 billion people on the planet, there's 8.6 billion different forms of spirituality if you were to define it that way. So, yeah. Anybody else?
I'll go. Excuse me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was raised in a very religious home, not from the very beginning, but my mom and father split, and my dad would say it was because of religion. Mom found God, and he didn't fit anymore. So, and not to say that was good, bad, or indifferent, but when she remarried, she was 32, and the guy she married was 21, and I was 11. So it was a kind of an interesting dynamic there, but she would not marry him until he became a Christian. So, and boy, did he. I mean, my life was forever changed, and probably in not a great way. I made some really weird life decisions based on that harsh religious upbringing. But oddly, I was just afraid. I was afraid of God's wrath for everything, just like somebody else was mentioning, that I was thinking, doing, wanting, desiring, or whatever. So my answer was to get married quickly so I could have sex, and so I could do what I was needed to do. But as I couldn't, like somebody else mentioned, I couldn't reconcile some things. I couldn't reconcile how there's only one path, but not everybody knows about it. So how does that work? They have their own path, and they believe just as strongly in their path as we believe in, or Christians believe in their path. So
Right.
how do you make that work?
Yeah.
So just a lot of questions. And then as I got older, I think I just kind of put all of it under the rug and just didn't worry about it and just went on with life. But as I did this survey, I kind of did it in two different ways. What did it look like, 20 years ago, and what does it look like now? And now is, for me, this was beautiful because this is one branch of my tree that seems extremely healthy right now. And I believe that it's because I have put the effort and the work into it. And I'm not a religious person. I'm a very spiritual person, but
Yep.
I do struggle with organized religion and church. Now, what I don't know is when you talked about God hurt and church hurt, I was never hurt by anybody in church, but I was hurt by the whole. I mean, my punishment growing up, whatever I did, I had to copy chapters out of the Bible relating to that for hours, So it was
Yeah.
very forced. So I don't know if that's the same thing as a church hurt or.
I would put it in the category because the fact is something was used against you to basically abuse you and diminish you.
Yeah.
And shame you. And so to me, it's still part of that.
Got it.
And when we talk about the sexual branch, that's the other thing is, there was a lot of shame about sexuality, having sex, premarital sex. Wow. Okay. That's a terrible thing. You're going to hell. Well, the other thing is, the average age of, this was probably about 15 years ago, the average first sexual encounter for males was age 13.
Yeah.
And it was, no, I take that back. It was 10 for girls. It was 13, 14. So it was about 3 or 4 years different. So it's like, well, then all of us were going to hell.
Yep, exactly.
So, and yet you think back historically, it's like people were getting married at age 12 because that's what they did. So, it's a really interesting and warped kind of thing that people can experience with that, hell and damnation kind of thing. And again, I think about mental health, and I cannot tell you the number of people that I've had to help kind of heal that kind of wounding, because it can happen in many, 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 many different ways. And kind of like what you said, Krista, it's like then you can be shamed to put all of your, paycheck into, the basket every week. And it's so there's all these, that's why I say this, this is why this tree to me is so interdynamic, is you really do have to think about it from the perspective of And I'm going to share a couple other stories that I'm sure will resonate. Because for those of you who are going to be working with others, it's just important to know these different dynamics. But it's like every one of these branches is interdynamic with each other. But when you think about the spiritual branch, wow, okay, from the financial branch, you wouldn't think that those would be connected, but obviously they can be. You wouldn't think that the intellectual branch, well, what about people who are shamed for going into a certain field? Because that happens too from the church perspective. I was literally appalled recently because an insurance company sent me a survey, and it was a new insurance company that I'm on that I haven't ever been on before. And they sent me a survey asking, do you do gender affirming therapy? And I declined to answer the question because I now know that there's a political nature behind that question. So it's like there's so many different layers of how spirituality can be used against you. And so I think it's just really important to, again, go there. Anybody else have thoughts or an experience about this? And then I want to share a couple things about God trauma. We'll talk more about this in general, but anything else as people were kind of going through this branch of, or this questionnaire for this branch?
I just have to say quickly again that, this particular branch, when I think about how much of my life I've spent really wanting to like support other people, whether it was my career or my volunteerism in the community, this is one that I think it's even shocking for some of us the day we realize maybe how church is used to keep women in a certain place. And,
Yep.
When I talk about this with my job and talk about, being female gender raised in this particular society, and I talk about that from a trauma perspective, some of my male colleagues are like, think I'm crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But that whole idea that your worth is different,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that alone is just that's a lot to try to sift and sort through and to find your authentic self.
Yeah, it's an assigned difference too. I mean, it's like it's non-negotiable when you go into most churches. So most churches who delineate that way. So absolutely, and so I think there's a lot, and that's one of the reasons, again, why I have the gender heritage part, as one of the soul factors, because the roles we play throughout many lifetimes, what about, and we'll dip into the past life stuff. What about those of us who have been priests and monks in or druids in past lives, which I've been all of those, and how that affects us now. How about, again, practicing spirituality, I know of 3 different lifetimes at least that I was killed because of my spiritual beliefs. So, and I have friends who had, have basically disclosed that they've been killed for those same reasons. So we can carry this kind of stuff because of gender, even if it hasn't happened in this lifetime. Wow, gender is a huge part of this. Absolutely. Yeah. What else? What else came up for all of you as you were exploring this branch? Yep, Sherry?
I can share. When I was filling this out, I was really sort of thinking about the pathway that I've been on, and it was really quite because I could sort of see step by step how it's all unfolded to get to where I'm at now. So my family weren't especially religious, but my mum's family were very strict Baptists. So we went to Sunday school and I would go to church with them sometimes. And then, I spent a lot of time with them. And then when I was about 11, we moved to Australia, and there was a very big community of people from Salt Lake City. So there was a big Mormon church. So I would go to church with them every weekend and hang out with them at their church. And then when I left school and I was working, I was friends with a guy and his wife who were Jehovah's Witness, and they were very focused on saving me and bringing me into their bold. But I loved all the conversations about religion. And I loved some of what they were saying, but that same thing, it didn't make a lot of sense, some of it. But it wasn't until I went to India when I was about 23, and I spent 6 months going. We were in all over India and Asia. So there was, numerous religions. And one day I was just going, I just had this thought that, oh my God, Christianity is not the only religion. It's just a group of people who think in one way. There's all these other people, the Muslims and the Hindus and the Buddhists, they all believe in their way of their beliefs. So what makes ours any better than theirs?
Right.
And it was just like a real sort of lightning bolt moment of like, oh my God. And from that point on, I just started researching all sorts of religions and reading about all sorts of religions. And then, step by step by step, I've got to the point where, let the religion bit go. And it's just about the spirituality side of it. So it's like, but it was just really interesting remembering how it's all unfolded step by step by step.
Mm-hmm.
It was really, it was good.
I love that. I love that. And I think that is why I love travel for so many reasons. And that's why every time I travel somewhere, even if it's because I really try to make everything a spiritual trip, and so every time I go visit a temple, or I'll try to talk to people about their local spirituality, or I'll really dig into the understanding. But I think you nailed it, is that there are so many different versions of religion and spirituality out there. I think current count is that there's about 2,000 identified religions in the world. And then there's offshoots of each one of those. So not everybody believes the same thing. So,
and then there's that next realization that, oh my God, it's just a group of men who have made all these decisions of how it's supposed to be.
Yes.
Why are we doing that again?
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because, and I know we talked, we are going to talk a little bit more about this, is that it really is a political nature. Religion is very politicized, which is very fascinating. And, for those of you who don't know, even in the Christian Bible, reincarnation used to be in the Christian Bible until 500 AD, when the ruler Constantine said, whoop, we're wiping that from the slate, because if people know they've got one more chance, or more than one chance, they're not going to listen to the government. And so basically it was literally wiped clean. And like 35 years later, I guess there's like a toothbrush taken to scrub out even more. So it's fascinating when you think about it, because it is very politicized. And I don't think I realized how politicized it was till I worked for that Catholic convent. And all of these nuns would really get together to vote for basically the grandmother of the house. And I'm like, what does that mean? And they literally do something similar to the conclave when you work or live in a convent. So it's very interesting how politicized some of these churches really are. But I can't remember, I think I shared this with all of you early on, but I remember this was years ago. This was probably, I don't know, 15 some years ago. I was at the airport locally. It was early in the morning. I was getting ready to fly, I don't know, somewhere. I don't even remember where. And a man with a dog was there. And of course, I'm going to go pet the dog. And really sweet little thing. And the man starts professing his faith. And I'm just being patient. I'm listening. That's okay. But he's talking about being saved. And I basically said to him, I said, well, this could have gone really poorly. But I said, with all of the religions and the gods that are practiced or that are worshipped in the world, there's got to be something bigger than those gods that created all of them. And he just got really quiet because he didn't know what to do with that. And I wasn't doing it to be in his face, but it's like one of those things. I was just sharing it, and it was very interesting to see him shift, because he had never thought of that idea. And I think, Sherry, you nailed it. It's like, well, wait a minute, what about all the other religions? And for me, and Krista, I think you said something about this, that I was going to a Unity church over in Greensboro, which Unity is supposed to be a very open, very inclusive Unity kind of church, practical Christianity, but they weave in a lot of metaphysics. And I was going to a class over there, and it was a stand-in. Well, the minister wasn't able to do that class, so someone kind of stepped in and did it. And about the third or fourth class in, he said something about Unity Churching knowing the truth. And I was like, well, wait a minute. And his first name was Todd. And I questioned him. I said, so Todd, tell me what you're saying about the truth. He's like, well, we know the truth. That was the last class I ever went to. Because it was just like any other church where if you think you know the truth, then it's playing out the same thing. And it's even more hypocritical being from a Unity church. Now, not every Unity church is like that, but it was still that idea of, no, I'm not doing that. You know, I am not going to be exclusive to someone else just because you think you know the truth. So it is fascinating how, well, so much is fascinating about spirituality, but I think churches can create a lot of woundedness. They can create a lot of woundedness. And we are going to talk more about the God trauma and the church hurt in a little bit. I do want to bring this up because, again, for those of you who are going to be working with other clients, practitioners, whomever, excuse me, it might be, it is not uncommon at all, unfortunately. I cannot tell you the number of times well, two things. I cannot tell you the number of times I've had a minister or a pastor come to me as a client because they are kind of like what you were saying, Krista. They are up there preaching, but they're questioning their own belief systems, and it's creating turmoil within them because it's like, well, wait a minute. I went to school for years to do this, and then all of a sudden my own belief systems are changing. So you can have ministers or priests or monks who have, or any religious figure that has their own spiritual crisis. I actually, and I will share this, it was fascinating. The person who supervised me when I was a treatment coordinator for the brain injured nun, she was an ex-nun who 20 years in realized, wait a minute, I don't want to do this, but I want to stay affiliated. So she left the convent, got married, and then she actually became the psychologist who supervised me to help with this brain injured nun. And one of the things she would do was she would hold workshops for the nuns about wellness and this and that. And one of the times we met, she said, oh, I'm going to have to stop early because I'm teaching a sexuality workshop for the nuns. And I'm like, at the time, I was like, how do you teach sexuality to nuns? And then I realized, wait a minute, she's not talking about sex ed. She's basically talking about what do you do with it when you're feeling sexual as a nun. So that's kind of where that went. But the other thing I want to point out is not only do, again, religious figures have their own turmoil, but I cannot tell you the number of clients I've had too. I have one right now who just recently disclosed this, but basically her minister as a teenager, it's really interesting. Her minister as a teenager developed a relationship with her, an ongoing behind the scenes relationship with her for 9 years, from like age 14 until like 25. And sexual relationship, he basically treated her like an adult, which she really liked, but all the while she was babysitting their kids, and she didn't even realize at the time it was wrong because it was built on a loving, godly relationship. I've probably had at least 20 minister or experiences with clients who said that their ministers developed these kinds of relationships with them. So again, blowing away their concept of what's okay in a church. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that, as you go on to work with other people, coaching them or working with them from a therapy perspective, or, doing health kinds of assessments with them, you might run into some of these church hurts and God traumas. And it's just important to know, okay, this is a key part of a person's development, and what does that do to their spiritual awareness and their spiritual belief systems themselves? Because I cannot tell you the number of ministers or religious figures that have come to me with their own difficulties, but also people who have been abused by them. So it's abused or manipulated. I would say that it's not always um, a direct abuse, but a lot of times it is. So
I just wanted to share one thing that inspired me some years ago now, but it was this television series about Joseph Campbell and the power of myth, where he was interviewed by Bill Moyer. I don't know if anyone else saw that,
yeah.
about all the different religious practices around the globe and how powerful that was and how they all sort of converged. And it was really cool to see that, that they overlapped in so many ways.
And when it is a religious practice with integrity, they do converge.
Yeah.
It's the ones that go awry that I think are the ones that create the woundedness. And so, I don't think, in fact, I just had a meeting from someone from the Alignable. She contacted me to ask if I would meet with her. And she does nutrition coaching, but she integrates spirituality. And she comes more from a Christian perspective, but it's that whole idea, we have very similar approaches. It's just when it's a belief system with integrity, you don't have to worry about the negative. So they all elevate themselves to loving kindness at some point. What else? Anything else? What about when a family member or your family or a partner or spouse differs significantly from your belief system? What happens then? Because I think that's another common situation. Because again, we're talking about other branches that are being affected because of, the spiritual branch, or vice versa for that matter.
Sorry, Kathy, say that again.
So what happens when your family of origin that you're tucked into, meaning you're still dependent on them, or a partner or a spouse, or even a child? I've got clients who their children have very, very different belief systems. But what happens when you're up against that within relationships? Because if you love these people near and dear, well, then what happens then? In other words, all kinds of things can happen. Yeah. So again, it's just the interdynamic nature of these branches that I think is really important to kind of play with and go, oh, well, that can have a direct impact. So I want to does anybody have another comment right now? We're going to get back to some of the church hurt and some of the other stuff that can happen in the spiritual world. But is there anything else that people want to bring up right now? Because I want to do a journey. Krista, you unmuted. Did you have something else you were going to say?
Yeah, this is like my favorite one. This is the sex one. I just think that I think for my soul, the purpose that I have people in my life that have very different views who may not even understand mine is because that's extra opportunity to be loved.
Mhm.
And it's taken me a while to get to that place. But I know for me, that's kind of how I've reconciled it. Like I have family members that don't even talk to me for a variety of reasons, and that's fine. I'm not talking about them, but I have friends, and they seem to be learning from me, whether they put it in those words or not, like what it means to just accept. Like I don't challenge whatever, and then I find over time they start asking me questions about stuff I do. So it's really interesting how that kind of works, that when you be that, when you are in that state of being, it's like it can really help people I think, evolve in ways they don't even realize, perhaps. That's part of the magic, I think, with it.
Absolutely. Well, and it is, again, love versus fear. But if you really are coming from a state of spirituality, it's all about love or self-love. It's all about aligning. So that taking that higher place can be hard, but you're right. It can be a very good role model to teaching people to, learn, wow, I don't have to have those other defenses up. So it's wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, I have a whole list of things that I wrote down as all of you were talking because there's so many different layers to this. I'm just going to say a few of them real quick. I already talked about the ministers. Sylvia Brown. I don't know how many of you remember Sylvia Brown. She was a pretty well-known psychic, and she was a pistol. She had a license on life. She's got great books out there, fun to read. But I went to a conference years ago, probably 2002, 2003. And of all things, it was a spirituality conference in Las Vegas. That was fascinating, fascinating. But I went to this conference, all kinds of speakers. Neil Donald Walsh was there. There were just all these different speakers there. And I remember sitting in on her talk, and she would talk for a while, and then she would have people stand up, and she'd do quick readings for them. And this woman stood up, and she was going on and on about how difficult her family was, that very harsh on her, never accepted. And Sylvia Brown says, and this is where she brings in her own idea of religion and spirituality. Now, Sylvia Brown was actually very respectful of churches. So when you read her work, it's not like she was dissing churches. So when she said this, it was fascinating. But she said, again, she was a pistol. But she said, you know what I say to that? She said, that commandment that says, honor thy father and mother? And everybody's like, yeah. And she said, I've added something to that. She said, I've added, honor thy father and mother if they were honorable to you. And I just loved that because it really helps people see that again, you can be what is the word? Scapegoated. You can be gaslit. You can be all kinds of things in the sake of spirituality or religion. But when you look at the whole idea of, is someone being honorable and loving to you? Is someone coming from that Christ-like spirit? Well, then it changes everything. And, I have a client I've been working with for years. She's been doing better, but she's got so many different angles of things going on. But she has a very hard time. She judges people a lot. She's very religious and she judges people a lot. But she has a trans child. And so she has been having a very hard time trying to understand that and use the right pronouns. And she was just very upset one day that, they basically came after her that, I can't believe after all these years you're still calling me your daughter when I'm actually a they. And so I was trying to help her understand how to honor and respect that person's soul. And she was just like negative about it. And I kind of pulled a little bit on her and I said, well, what would Christ do in this situation? And she pulled back. And I said, I could see that she was processing it. And I said, there's the difference between being a Christian and being Christ-like. It's very, very different. And if you're being Christ-like, you're going to be loving. And I felt like I was like, oh gosh, I'm stepping on her toes. But she stopped and she was like, well, I'll think about that. And she came in the next session the next week and she said, I have to thank you for that. I had never put it into that perspective. I was looking at how my buttons were being pushed by what I was not realizing. I was not being what I'm practicing and preaching. And I'm like, okay, perfect. So that's the other part of this is there's a very big difference between being Christian and being Christ-like. That loving kindness is Christ-like. So it's that elevation to the idea of there's so many churches out there, unfortunately, right now that are considering themselves as Christian, but they're not being Christ-like at all. And when the previous Pope, when Trump was elected the first time, the Pope kind of got in trouble because he said he's not Christian. And, you know, that was all over the news for a while, but I think it was a language barrier thing because I really think he was trying to express, you know, Trump was not being Christ-like. He might go to church, but it doesn't mean he's Christ-like. And I really think it was a language barrier thing. And but I think, you know, I think this is where a lot of churches have gotten away from being Christ-like, and a lot of the negativity has come in. But that's it. It's like, wow, if you can just get aligned with that loving nature within you, your soul's, you know, highest being, you're going to be in that loving space anyway. And to me, that's what that alignment is about, is that when you align, you don't take as many things personally. You're able to be in that Christ-like nature much more. So we could talk a lot about that, but you know, it's this whole idea of how do you how do you reconcile that within yourself? But I think there's so many different angles to this. The other thing, and I've got a few other things that triggered from when you were talking earlier. You know, when I first moved here 25 years ago, I had just come from like a Unity church that was fantastic. It was not judgmental, like I mentioned this one was. It was just very open, very diverse, very loving. And I know Claire, the minister, told me before I left. She said, "Well, Kathy, just remember that not every Unity church is the same. Just take that bit of information with you." And, you know, I didn't really know what she meant, but I think I learned very quickly that it does differ depending on where you're at. But when I first moved here, I cannot tell you the number of clients that asked me which church I was going to almost immediately. And I was just like, oh, what do you mean, what church am I going to? I didn't realize it was a culture here to ask that. I really didn't. That was one of those cultural kind of adjustments I had to make. I can't tell you the number of clients who said basically that they were going to come pick me up on a Sunday and take me to their church. I also was shocked to know when I moved here that people spend all day at church on Sundays, sometimes the evening as well as Wednesday evenings. And I'm like, what? That's a lot of church. I grew up in a Catholic church. You go once a week and that's it. So, you know, it's really interesting, again, because it is so woven into people what they have come up with as far as their upbringings that, you know, again, many of you have talked about your own awakenings and how those seals were cracked and then things started to open. And and not I mean, not many of you still hold any wounds, it sounds like, but it is one of those things where it's just important for us to, you know, kind of explore. So, okay, boy, we could talk about this for a long time because there's so many layers of this. Okay. Any thoughts or questions with what I just said before we do adjourning? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I want to kind of take you on a journey, and it's going to feel like a little reminiscent of one we did a couple weeks ago, and I'm doing that on purpose. So what I want you to do is get yourself seated comfortably, feet flat, um, eyes closed whenever you're ready to close your eyes. And I'm really just gonna do a little bit of grounding with you, and then I'm gonna ask you some questions. And I want you to kind of tune in and just get a sense for them. Because this is, again, it's going to seem very reminiscent of something we did a couple weeks ago, and there's a purpose for that. So get yourselves very comfortable. Just take a couple, three slow, cleansing, deep breaths. And I'll do a little bit of counting with you in a moment, but just get yourself settled since you're becoming used to these breathing exercises and these journeys. In just a moment, I'm going to walk you through those typical breaths of where I'm having you take a slow, deep breath in. I'm going to count from 1 to 5. I'll have you hold it briefly. I'll have you release it as I count backwards from 5 to 1. I'm only going to do 3 of these because you're getting pretty good at just grounding and aligning and quieting yourselves. This is really more a matter of going within enough to gather the information and experience what I'm going to walk you through than doing a deep soul journey this time. So take that first deep breath in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold it. Release. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And just breathe naturally. Again, allowing yourself to settle into your seat even more. Your body's feeling a little heavier, more relaxed. You're watching the tension just kind of melt off of you, whether it's your shoulders or your neck or your arms or any other part of your body. Just let that melt away. And take another slow, deep breath in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold it. And release. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And just breathe naturally. You're noticing your mind get more quiet. Your body feeling even more relaxed. Noticing yourself go deeper within, focus turning inward. And one more slow, deep breath in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold it. Release. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Just breathe naturally. Allowing yourself to just settle into a very quiet space, very introspective, very safe and relaxed. So just turning your attention within, tuning into that deepest part of who you are. Also noticing what comes up for you when I ask these questions. So for you, what does spirituality look like? What does it look like to you? Just allow any messages or information to come to the surface. So secondly, what does it sound like to you? What does spirituality sound like to you? And what does spirituality taste like to you? What does it smell like to you? What does the spiritual branch of health for you smell like? What does spirituality feel like to you? So how does it feel from a kinesthetic or touch perspective? And also, what does it feel like to you from a proprioceptive perspective? In other words, the essence of spirituality. What is that? What does the essence of spirituality feel like to you? I'm just going to say all of these one more time just to see if there's any other information you're supposed to allow to come in. So, what does spirituality look like to you? Sound like to you? Taste like to you? Smell like to you? How does it feel to you, as in kinesthetic or touch? And what does it feel like to you from that proprioceptive perspective or the essence of spirituality? In other words, how do you know you're in a spiritual state or feeling spiritual? Whenever you're ready, if you want to bring that all together, spend a little time jotting some notes down, maybe make a description of all these things for you. So, what presented itself to you as you were going within to explore these questions?
I'll pop in.
Okay.
Um, I was really surprised at how like nature oriented it was for me, and it was really just so soothing and beautiful. Like it sounded like trickling water, just like a really nice stream, and it tasted like, fruits, and it smelled of flowers. It was just like my own like personal Eden. And so that was really beautiful.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
thank
love
you.
that. Yeah, that's awesome. What about for others?
I'll piggyback on that. Immediately, I saw nature, but it was all very reminiscent of church to me, like the cathedral of nature, like the opening of cascading green and altars in nature and sounds of like, yes, birds and wind and water, but then it was all very enmeshed with like, and then the sounds of song and fanfare and organs and the taste
Hmm.
of communion and the feel of the community, the congregation, the people,
Yeah,
yeah, it was, and like even the smell of incense came through.
yeah,
Was it was all commingled.
yeah. I love it. I love it.
Jenny, it's so funny that you said the smell of incense because that did go through my brain too. But then when she went to taste, I was like, oh my God, I've tasted it too because I've gotten too close and inhaled it.
Yep, yep, yep. I do that a lot with my oils when I spray them. Accidentally, you breathe them in, you're like, oh, yeah, yeah. What about for others?
I got with the the smell. Yeah, I had the nature thing as well. Well, I had the nature thing, but then I had nature and more. So there's that other 99% that we can't see physically. So nature's that physical bit, but to me, the spirituality is like that feeling into the whole, everything we can't see as well.
Yeah.
But with the smell, I got, like the smell for me was standing on the top of a mountain in the Alps, and all there is to breathe is perfect air versus thinking that you're smelling something nice by plugging in one of those air freshener things into your and saying, "Oh, my house smells so beautiful."
Yeah.
That was like the opposite of what it is.
It wasn't
Yeah,
artificial.
yeah. It was just like mountain air. There's nothing
Yeah,
more perfect.
yeah, yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about others? Yeah, Jen.
Mine was I'm always very nature inspired too, and I love the church and I love the cathedrals. And I love also what you said earlier about the expansion of the childhood part of you, and the older you get and you go on your spiritual journey. For me, there's just so many overlapping of the religions. Um, but in this, so I wanted to just comment on that because I thought that was so beautiful the way you explained that. So thank you. For me, the spirituality, the other piece of that was just memories with family. So, like when you said taste, it was my great grandma's sugar cookies.
Yes, that's a spiritual experience. Absolutely.
Or like a weekend barbecue with my family. So, like kind of like that nourishing soul piece for me. So, like just being outside, but then also getting to experience life with the people that I love. Those kind of memories or thoughts popped up for me.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. And so that's why I like to do this is, it's all of the senses. It's not just one sense. So it's like the experience of all of it is the culmination of all of it. The synthesis of all of it is really a big part of the spiritual experience. Yeah. What about others? Anybody else want to share something?
I didn't really get a taste of what it tasted like. But and when I thought about what it looked like, for me, it was sort of like the Matrix, if you remember the movie, like just like this interwoven, all these zillion different points of light and aspects of being, because we're all individuated aspects in my
Mhm.
belief system of the creator. So almost like a disco ball. if you were to look from the inside out.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
But yeah, I had a hard time with that. I guess maybe I'm just too practical by nature. It's like, it doesn't really smell like anything. Not champa, maybe.
Yeah, and it's different for everybody, and that's the whole point. It's like everybody's going to have a different experience of each and every one of these questions.
Yeah.
And so, if your disco ball was what, really aligns with you for that, then that's perfect. It's
Yeah.
absolutely perfect.
For me, it all boils down to what really resonates, like, and then by resonance, I mean like it just feels right in my core.
Mhm.
A relationship or something that I see or someone who I know or a circumstance or, belief system, a concept.
Mhm.
That's
Absolutely.
how I've built it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's it. It's however it again, I'm going to use your word resonates for you is what's going to be resonant within you. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
I had two things that came up that I thought were interesting. How it feels like on the kinetic level.
Mhm.
I think it was you, and now I'm going to feel bad. We did an exercise where we feel like the energy. Was
Yep, that
that
was the very
that's
beginning.
okay, good.
The very first session.
That's what came to mind with me was, how does that feel like kinetically? Because normally you don't, this isn't something that you really touch or feel, but in the energy aspect of it, I feel like, yes, you can physically touch spirituality in this way. And then the other weird thing that came up was the smell. And we always used to call this smelling the ozone. And I don't know if anyone else has used that phrase, but it's kind of that like before it rains smell. The air is heavy and uh, I don't know how else to explain it, but that's the smell that I really, really um connect with spiritual because it feels like you're engulfed in it, like almost like the air is touching you in a way that it doesn't normally touch you.
So I want to throw something out there because for me, I mean, I need trees around me. That is part of my spirituality because of my own, um, energy that I connect in with. But I read this recently. I'm kind of a nerd when I look at documentaries and things. But what's fascinating is that smell that we smell right before it rains is actually the messages from the trees are releasing some of their energies at the trees or the foliage, and it's not the rain necessarily that we're smelling. It's the release of whatever those trees and foliage are because they're getting ready to receive, which I find fascinating.
I love that.
It's super cool. Yeah, I learned that about 2 months ago. Because again, I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to stuff like that. But I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the energy of the trees just getting ready to receive. So it's such a cool kind of thing when you really, and of course, me, when I put this PowerPoint together, of course, I had to put a tree in there because to me, it's just so representative of so much. Oh. Anybody else with an experience? And then I'm going to kind of explain why I did this the way I did this. What I will say for me when I feel like something, now granted, I kind of live my life as even a paperclip sitting here as spiritual. It's just energetically because I do try to bring in the energy of something, whatever the something is, um, and the essence of something. But for me, when if I were to go through these questions, it's like from the outside, I would describe these things, but there's something that happens from the inside when I taste and feel and sense and hear, and it really comes from within for me now. And I, my newsletter that is going to come out in July, I talk about kind of doing soul care because it's very different than self care. But it's that idea of what do you bring within you? What do you take in? What do you breathe in and become the moment with? And I think that's another way to look at this is how do you become what something looks like. So if you're looking at a tree, if you're looking at a leaf, if you're looking at a dog, if you're, what is it, the mountain, whatever it is, how do you become that? Because that's how you bring that energy within you. Same thing of how do you bring the sound within you? How do you resonate and bring that sound in? The taste of it, how do you bring the taste in? How does the smell, come into you? When we think of something from a kinesthetic perspective, or that whole essence of the spirituality, again, we're bringing that experience of it within us. The reason that I did this the way I did, because these are the exact same questions, they might not be in the exact same order, is that these are the same questions I used when I asked you about what home feels like for you. Because oftentimes spirituality feels exactly like home. When you discover what it is that home feels like for you and what spirituality feels like for you, there's usually a pretty strong alignment. And so when you think about it that way, would you say that your experience a couple sessions ago when I took you on that journey, was that similar to what you experience now? Was that different? And if so, how does that differ for you? Because these questions are the exact same questions. Yeah, Eleanor.
I thought I maybe did something wrong because so much of it was so similar. So I didn't speak up because I was like, oh, so yeah, for me, big time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is another way to start developing your spiritual branch, is really to think about, what does home feel like? Because that's very likely to be where you land from a spiritual perspective too. So you didn't do anything wrong at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing she was, because it was more about the warmth of the sunshine and a big soft blanket and just feeling. I thought I was sitting here drinking my turmeric milk, thinking how warm and soothing that is. And I'm like, that's what it tastes like. That's what it feels like. It feels comfort, brings me comfort, brings me security, just like my home does.
Yeah. Yeah. Nope, you were right on track. What about for others?
Okay, I just went back and looked at my notes because I was thinking they weren't the same, but they were almost exactly the same. There was a little more detail in the home that wasn't in my spirituality, so I'm not sure what to, I don't know what that says, but both had bodies of water, and it wasn't the same body of water, but and I don't live at a body of water, but apparently I want to.
Your soul
But
wants to.
very much so. But mine were very similar as well. But I did I was outside from spirituality and inside, I mean, inside for home. That was that was the difference. But they were very, very similar. I didn't think they were, but they were very similar.
Yeah.
I was in different places
Yeah.
in those journeys, but nature is involved in everything. I grew up in the trees, so I always go back there, but not actually in a tree. Y'all know that. I grew up in the mountains, and so that a body of water is actually where I think I should live near, since I continuously end up there in all these journeys. But I was a swimmer, so at least I did swim, but somehow it's all connected. But anyway,
Well, so
I was very similar.
if we want to, no pun intended, dive into that, you could have come from a water planet. That could be your water planet. You could have lots of water signs in your astrology. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could be part of that. And it could just be that your soul is like really craving water because maybe it's calming and cleansing. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways to look at that. Yeah, I was looking at the kitty too. So I was just trying to see who put a mention in the chat.
She's the office cat, and she's deciding that I'm important right now.
She wants to join in the spiritual conversation.
Yes.
So how many of you had animals be part of this home and this experience from the spiritual perspective? Because for some of you, I think it did during the home, but not necessarily for the spiritual part of it. And yet animals to me are probably far more spiritual than humans are. they lead much more soulful lives. They're not so wrapped up, obviously, in the troubles of the human condition. Anybody else have an experience where they're like, oh, wow, I wasn't expecting that? So the reason I did this in this way, again, is because our spirituality feels like home. When we are in a situation that doesn't feel aligned with our spiritual needs, do we feel at home? We generally don't. There's something missing or there's something awry. Like some of you said, being in a church didn't feel right, or being in a situation like this didn't feel right. And so, I think that's it is, our home, our spiritual home is a way to align with what we need from all of these different senses of who we are. And it's just, when you're working with clients about this, it's a great way to explore, like if they are trying, like they're discovering their spirituality or something shifting or there's turmoil, it's a way to help them kind of go within and kind of get a sense for where they want to evolve to. Because if you're not feeling at home, there's something to examine, but it's just a really important part of, again, I think, it's a nice tool to be able to have that experiential piece of helping someone identify what aligns with them and what doesn't. So, I kind of did that on purpose and I wasn't trying to trick people, but most people do have similar kinds of experiences. So, okay. Any questions or thoughts on any of this before we go on? Because we got some juicy stuff to talk about and I just want to make sure we, finish up with this. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to go through some basics. I chose this picture on purpose. So I've said this before, religion is created for us, whereas spirituality is something we create for ourselves. And I chose this picture on purpose because, that process of coming into ourselves for that spiritual process or moving out of some sort of either spiritual process or religious process can be messy. It can be very uncomfortable. It can be, oh gosh, this is not at all what I thought was going to happen. And, so many different branches can challenge our spiritual branch, but it can be very messy as you're creating and painting your new picture of who you are and who you want to be within the spiritual realm. So moving away from certain beliefs, and I just realized that's not beliefs, that's beliefs, or move toward new ones. So, it can be messy, but also to me, no matter how messy, it's a beautiful part of the process as long as you're learning about your soul. As it's that whole idea again of to know your soul is to know true health. Sometimes it has to get messy for it to get cleaned up in a way that makes us go, oh, wow, this is what really fits. So I think it can be a really cool process. So again, we self-design spirituality. It usually begins with the beliefs of our family or primary caregivers. Those beliefs evolve or change over time. And I tell people it's kind of like this recipe, a sprinkle of this, a sprinkle of that. To me, that's what spirituality is. Like there's no rules with how we create it. There's no rules with how we practice it. There's no rules with how we conceptualize it or feel it, taste it, think it, see it, smell it. There's no rules because it's a very individualized program. But the rejection, it can be a part of the rejection of the formalized religion and that process of kind of working your way out of that and challenging those beliefs within yourself. Or it can be a rejection of spirituality, meaning maybe a previous form of spirituality no longer fits for you either. So I think this is like the evolution of how this continues to work into your tapestry of life. And so I say this because, again, I cannot tell you how many people you will probably come across, and as you're working with them, that are completely reworking their whole tapestry of life according to what's happening or not happening within their spiritual branch. Also, just to remember that nearly 90% of Christians participate in at least one, quote, New Age activity. So there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of, even if you conceptualize yourself as being part of a religion, that does not at all mean that you might not be weaving in some of these other types of activities as well. In fact, I love when I'm driving down the road and there's a Christian church or even a Baptist church that is teaching Tai Chi classes. or yoga classes, or it's like, okay, do they realize that they're integrating Eastern religion with what they're doing? They may or may not realize that, but I love seeing that. I love it, love it, love it. And also to remind you that, from a metaphysics perspective, about 45% of Christians actually believe in reincarnation, past lives, karma, things like that. So even though they may not always talk about it, there's a lot of integration going on. And to me, that speaks a lot to the fact that, there is a lot of evolution going on within, the spiritual and the religious realms. But, it's that idea that there is no one right way. And that's the biggest thing. There is no one right way. And to me, it's that idea that if you think there is one right way, then that's kind of taking you away from the whole point of spirituality in general, because if you can't see spirituality in someone else, well, then because you're putting them in a kind of a rigid belief, then there's more to learn. So your own personal spirituality. So thinking back through, okay, what has your journey been like to now? We've already talked somewhat about this. What were the twists and turns? Where I'm going to pause and ask if there are any other twists and turns that you weren't expecting, and just weave in some of the experiences that I've heard of in therapy sessions. Do you have any church hurts, got traumas? Do you have a spiritual community you can turn to? To me, that's a huge part of, again, integrating the interpersonal and the social branches. And do your beliefs affect your primary relationships? So I want to talk about twists and turns for a second. Now, I didn't do a video about this, but I want to throw out there, part of the idea of awakenings and kind of, I call it, sort of cracking a seal for people. There are so many people that they have to have very difficult experiences in order for those awakenings to happen. So people like Eben Alexander. How many of you know who Eben Alexander is? He's a couple of you. So he's a neuroscientist, neurosurgeon, in fact, didn't believe in any metaphysics, didn't believe in any spirituality. And then he had a near-death experience, and all of a sudden he's like, whoa, what was all that? And then he's now become this like best-selling author, and he teaches around the world about this. So sometimes we have to have these awakenings. I can't tell you the number of people who have come to me with either chronic illness or serious injuries from accidents. And all of a sudden, that's when they start believing. And yet it really challenges them because maybe they've never believed this stuff before, or maybe it's shifted their whole perspective of what they believed in general. And now it's opening up a whole new door. I literally had an Akashic record reading with a psychologist yesterday who her mom died in 2023 after she didn't tell me this, but I sensed it was a pretty intense illness, and it turned out to be cancer. But it was one of those things where she really just was exploring, and the whole thing was, it wasn't until her mom died that she started exploring some of this stuff. And so we talked all hour yesterday. And then when I sent her the audio, she emailed me right away and she said, man, I can't stop listening to this. I'm just so much more interested in what happens and how to weave this in. And so, again, sometimes we have to go through those dark nights of the soul in order to experience some sort of awakening from a spiritual perspective. And I just want to throw this out there, whether or not any of you have experienced something like that or know people who have experienced something like that, because sometimes we have to be jolted awake. Have anybody experienced something like that? And it could even be a terrible breakup. It could be a divorce. It could be anything like that that somehow jolts you. I know when my dad died, I had some major experiences. I think I've already shared those, but it's like that really popped the top. That was like, I had many experiences before he passed, but I was a kid. I didn't really know what to do with them. But it wasn't until his death that just really jolted me. And I was pissed off at God for a while for lots of reasons. I was just angry. And then as it unraveled and I could understand it all, and it helped me find peace again. It's like, oh my gosh, that was really part of my awakening process because I understood so much more. But I was pissed in the meantime. Plus, my moon sign is Scorpio, so I can get pretty pissed if I want to. But anybody think about anything in their life that kind of opened things up for them?
I was asking myself, what's the earliest? And what comes to mind is I was 8 or 9 and I experienced a severe beating from my dad over something I had done that was very age appropriate. And I can, go back to that like it was yesterday. But I remember life feeling, for a lot of reasons, very different after that experience because my mom didn't step in to protect me. My sister, whose property I had uh, messed with, like, I'm not that I expect my older sister to step in, and she's a kid, but it was like I remember feeling so very alone. But I also then remember kind of how life then began to change after that happened. Really interesting, but that's the earliest one. 2 divorces, lot
Mhm.
pain has made me change a lot.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for saying that, and thank you for sharing. And I want to use that as a segue because that's kind of where I was going to go is the whole idea of, and I'm going to bring this into the psychological realm for a minute, that oftentimes people who dissociate because of a very traumatic response, whether it's abuse, whether it's I mean, it could be anything. It could be abuse of any kind. It could be um, really, it could be an accident. It could be really anything. My brain is like listing all the things it could come from. But anybody who dissociates, and for those of you who don't know what that means, dissociation is basically a form of like your awareness breaks at that point as a form of coping. So you disconnect from the event so that you don't have to fully experience it. But in soul perspective, one of the things to think about is I really think our soul disconnects on purpose in some ways so that it doesn't get so fractured and fragmented. And in some ways, some people become very good at dissociating so that they can detach from that. So for a lot of people who, for those of you who are practitioners and future practitioners, when you learn about dissociation, think about it also from the soul perspective, because it's actually the soul's way of saying, whoa, 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 I can't do this. But a lot of times it's diagnosed as a problem. And that's where, the soul knows what to do to protect itself sometimes, but we pathologize some of the things that our soul knows how to do in order to protect. So, you know, I know that, like you said, Krista, you felt different. You didn't really explain how you felt different, but that was probably your soul's way of going, whoo, I got to shift some things in order to survive this situation. Does that all make sense for people? And that's where the psychological realm really, that branch comes in, is sometimes, those difficult or traumatic responses are basically part of our soul's coping. So, yeah. Anybody else think about anything that the twists and turns or anything that really opened things up for them?
When my parents divorced, I was an adult and I had young children. And I think like a major shift happened to me then, but it was more like I really had to do life with God every day, like just to even get through the day. I couldn't listen to anything but like religious music, and it just was like my whole foundation shifted. But then it's funny because I think it was just one step on my journey. Obviously, um, everything that's gone on. I mean, I just live in a very red um, area, and was very involved in church, but also performatively trying to gain worthiness and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when all this stuff that's kind of happened in the last, 8-10 years, I just shifted completely away. And I'm still like, love Jesus, like a lot. And we just have like an ongoing thing, but I just don't feel any desire to be in those spaces anymore or play that game anymore. Yeah. So,
Well, but you have built the relationship you need,
yeah.
and you don't need anything else to tell you how to do that.
Yeah. And people just don't understand that here.
Yeah.
They just don't get it, but it's okay. I'm fine. I have total peace about it. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So,
yeah. Anybody else?
My mom passed away when I was 25. I was finishing up grad school and getting ready to move to New York, and I have a vivid memory very shortly after she died of sitting on my bed and thinking, okay, you're all alone now. Like this is, but I was like, my dad's still alive. My brothers were all still alive at the time, but it just felt like, the matriarch was gone, and I had to step into that role for myself in some way. And in so many ways it opened up my life. Like my mom and I were so kind of codependent. I feel like I was able to go to New York without any worry about her. So that was a big one for me. And I feel like I am now kind of coming out of one as well, from postpartum, and then in the midst of my postpartum experience, I lost my brother. So there, there's been a lot of stuff, but I feel myself like emerging from another one right now. And just like in this, starting this module, I kept hearing this snippet from a Shakespeare monologue I used to do about a girl confessing her love to a mother about her son. And the line is something to the effect of, thus Indian-like, religious in mine error, religious in mine error, I adored the son who looks upon his worshipper but knows of him no more. And
wow.
Right? And
yeah.
that, like, in this whole module, it's just really kind of dawning on me of like, wow, that's kind of been my journey in life too, is I put people on a pedestal. And boy, did they knock that shit down and gut me.
yeah.
They gut me. But that's been a really cool part of this module.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I'm impressed that you remember the words. yeah. yeah. But see, this is it. We all have our personal journeys from the spiritual realm, from the side. I mean, we could go through every branch, but this is such, to me, again, this is my sandbox, but this is how we get to know ourselves, is through our own souls. So, all of these twists and turns are all part of our development. And that's why, again, I emphasize this in the videos, but it's like what we learn is part of our soul's journey. And so every branch is spiritual. It's just learning how to bring it all together and weave it and realize, wow, this is me because of this, this, and this. And so, it's to me, it's a beautiful part, because you do weave your own tapestry. It's just doing it with as little angst as possible, like releasing and healing that stuff is really what this is about. Yeah. So wonderful. Wonderful. Anybody else? And I have a couple of things I really want us to talk about, but I want to make sure that we're touching base. Okay, I'm going to move on because, and we're just going to talk about the church hurt and God trauma briefly, because we've already talked about some of this, but knowing the idea that soul wounds can obviously be caused by spiritual beliefs, by centers, by churches, by leaders, from parents who are rigid, from really any aspect that is harmful to us. Because anytime church or spiritual beliefs are used against us, it's a problem. It is a problem. That is not godlike. That is not spirit-like. That is not Christ-like. So we have to kind of look at it as anytime that something is manipulated, it is not obviously for our highest good. Again, a person can be brainwashed or groomed by a church as much as by a person. And when I say groomed, grooming is a term that is used as far as someone who is basically intentionally trying to manipulate, trying to bring someone in, abusers who basically groom the abusee, kind of talk to them in a certain way, manipulate them in a certain way. That's kind of where those worship situations come in. That's where cult leaders come in. They groom the person to get them to follow them, all of that. Gaslighting, gaslighting can be used in many, many ways from a religious standpoint, spiritual standpoint, for some people, a biblical standpoint, using God to harm a person. The whole idea of Christian nationalism right now, that is obviously not Christ-like, unfortunately. There's a whole lot of darkness and power. But, and I put this picture here on purpose because, the house of forgiveness, well, isn't that sort of an oxymoron in some cases? Not all cases, but it's that whole idea of, what certain churches teach may go directly against what is healthy and true to a person. So it can be out there for sure. But I want to talk about this because this is an important part of spirituality. So the dark side. So witchcraft is making a huge comeback right now. And it's not the good witch kind of witchcraft that's coming back. It is the dark witch. It's the dark, the kind of the sort of not so good. What's really interesting about it, it's growing rapidly. And basically what they're saying is that it's primarily millennial women who have rejected churches that are making up this very grand comeback. What I find fascinating about it too is that a lot of the I found that I learned this, and I think I might have mentioned this before, but when I was doing a journey in Mount Shasta, California, I met with a woman who did a vision quest with me all day. And I knew it wasn't going to turn out to be a full vision quest because my guides very much intervened and I knew they would. But at the end of the day, she told me, she said, well, what are you doing the rest of the day? I said, well, I'm going to go back down to the store. It's called the Soul Connection. That's right in downtown Shasta. Not a huge downtown. And there's a stone I saw. I might go look at it again. And she said, well, they're all run by Trumpsters, right? And I said, spiritual stores? And she said, oh yeah. She said all of them in that area it's a very red county. And I was just so boggled by that. I just, I still don't quite understand how metaphysical stores that are supposed to be about love and this can be run by people who are dark. And it's really interesting because there's this whole different energy behind a lot of the spirituality that's out there right now. And I'm not trying to offend anyone, but it's really fascinating to look at what's happening because the spiritual beliefs out there are very, very kind of interestingly woven. And I want to bring this up because, like I said before, there are a lot of people who have experienced being burned at the stake, being hung, lots of past life memories coming up. And so with the increase in witchcraft, I've actually had several clients come to me saying, I'm having these flashbacks. I'm really afraid of what's happening. And so, there's a lot of therapy work and soul healing work I've had to do with certain clients because they're having all of this kind of come back to them because, again, witchcraft is on the rise. We've already talked a lot about ghosts and negative spirits and some of the things that can happen when we are talking about the environmental branch of health. But I also want to bring up the idea of dark entities, curses, hexes, and embodiment. Now, I can't tell you the number of people in the last probably 8 to 10 years that have come to me feeling something and they couldn't quite figure out what it was, but they were feeling like their psyche was being taken over or their souls were being taken over, or they had these interactions with people and then all of a sudden they felt terrible. Now, this isn't the same thing as just the bad energy that a lot of people emit. This is literally intentional kind of action that certain people are taking in order to control people or to kind of either mess with their spirituality, mess with their relationships, or mess with their sense of being. The reason I'm bringing this up is that, for those of you who are going to be working with people, coaching people, again, this kind of goes back to that idea of, there's a lot that's happening that is seemingly psychological in nature, but it's actually the dark energy of spirituality that people are using in order to create these kinds of experiences from people. Does that make any sense? And I'm going to give some examples of this. And has anybody already experienced this with clients or colleagues or their own selves? Because I want to.
Are you talking about like people capitalizing on the fear and anxiety that's sort of blanketing it and using that to manipulate?
Yes, but going deeper. So in other words, people, who are practicing witchcraft, using spells to control people, trying to mess with their minds, put thoughts in their minds, or feel like they're being taken over. I've had a number of people call me, and like I said, the last 6 to 8 years, and going, "Oh my God, I think I'm losing my mind. This is what's happening." And then as we're discussing it, they will start to say, "Yeah, it started happening when I was interacting with this person, or it started happening or these people." And then we would kind of explore it a little bit further. A lot of times I'll do intuitive work with them, and I can immediately identify, oh, wow, does this person do witchcraft? And they'll say yes. And then we'll have to basically go down the path of helping them disentangle kind of the spells or the hexes that have been placed on them, because this other person wanted to manipulate them. So I am talking about kind of the manipulation, but it's a more direct kind of action that some people are experiencing right now, of literally having people use witchcraft or other kinds of spells to control them. And it sounds like that's way out there. It sounds like a sci-fi movie or some sort of a movie that can happen, but it's a real thing. And it can happen. I'm not saying it's happening to a ton of people, but really this is a possible situation. Does anybody did that help you understand that, Donna?
Yes, I think so. I do know somebody who's having things like that happen. She's having lucid dreams and of murder victims coming to her and telling her, who they are and how they were killed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And so someone who is skilled at dark magic can actually infiltrate a person's mind, can infiltrate a person's energy field. I will give you an example of this. It was last year. I don't remember what month it was. It was sometime like mid to late summer. So I had someone contact me, and I want to say she lived like I think it was either Central Time Zone, or I think it was Mountain Time, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. I think it was Mountain Time Zone. And she wanted to do an Akashic record reading. She paid for the session. We had the conversation. And the way I do these readings is that I always want to have a conversation with a person. And for me, it's because I want to hear their voice, because for me, this is how I do this, is when I tune into their voice. To me, I call it the energetic signature of their soul. I do everything by energy so I can tune into that voice. And then when I sit down to do the meditation before their session, I tune back into that energy, that frequency of their voice, and then I, collect the energy or collect the information through their energy. Well, this woman in particular, we had the conversation, and she talked and talked and talked and talked. I had a hard time getting off the phone because she just kept talking. I said, okay, well, we'll cover all of this in the session. And the session was scheduled for like 5 weeks later. Well, I'm not kidding you. Between the time that we spoke and the time that we had the session, she emailed me probably 50 sometimes. And she kept saying, okay, and I want to talk about this and I want to talk about that. But I could tell there was an energy to her that I'm like, okay, I don't know if she's manic. It was just an energy to her. It was very interesting. And I said, why don't you, and I said, you've given me lots of information. Why don't you give me your top 5 or so things that you want to talk about, and we'll see if we can get to them. And she said, okay, okay, okay. Well, then she sent me like 3 more emails after that. And it was one of those things where, like, okay, I'm having to set boundaries. And so the time for the session comes. I got on the Zoom like I always do. I wait, 5 or 10 minutes, and I'm like, okay, she's not showing up. What's going on? I email her. Didn't hear anything back. And my policy is that I wait about 15, 20 minutes. And then after that, I consider it basically, that she's not coming, and that, I don't reschedule those sessions. Um, and when I emailed her, I said, hey, I'm waiting on the Zoom. Let me know, if you're just having problems with the link or whatever. Never heard from her, or I didn't hear from her for about 2 hours. And then I get this scathing email from her saying, you're an awful person. You didn't send me reminders. You didn't tell me this was that this was going to be a forfeit. And I'm like, well, it's all over my website. But it was really interesting. And I said, I'm sorry, but this is my policy. I'm super busy. And so I can't like just reschedule all of these sessions. The next morning I wake up and I felt terrible. And I just not emotionally terrible. I just physically, something was wrong. And I'm like, what the heck? And it took me about 3 or 4 hours to realize that she had done something to me energetically, because I could feel it was her energy. And I have, in fact, I provided you with some tips early on in the course about how to remove those energies and how to release it. And it took quite a while for me to release it, but I had to like shove it away in order to really feel better that day. And what I realized was that she had been using some sort of energetic, and I'm not sure if it was magic or a curse or whatever it might have been, but she was using something toward me. And so, it is not unusual. And there's something called anger spears that you can receive if someone is disproportionately angry towards you. They can send energy to you in that way, and you can feel that energy. There's all these different kinds of soul wounds and psychic energies that you can feel, but that was the first time that I can remember really feeling under psychic attack. That it was a very different feeling than just someone being pissed off at me or mad at me. It was just like there was an energetic hold. It's almost like Spider-Man throwing a net over you, but tightening it really tight and having it just wrench you. It was just very uncomfortable, and I could feel it trying to get into me. But again, luckily, I figured out what it was and I knew what to do. So the reason I'm bringing this up, it can sound like it's really way out there, excuse me for saying it this way, batshit crazy kind of stuff. But if you know what this stuff is, and wow, okay, this stuff is possible, it helps you determine, is this really a mental health kind of thing, or is this really a spiritual health kind of thing? And it's super important for practitioners. And this is kind of why I'm saying this, is that there's many people who are going to be working with other people. That if you just have a little bit of information about this, you might be able to help them understand whether it's from the spiritual side or the psychological side. About 2 years ago, I had someone contact me, and I don't remember what country she was in. She was somewhere in Europe, and she sent an email to me, and she wanted to do an Akashic record reading, but she wanted me to help her identify who was stealing her soul. And she was, as I was emailing with her. Now, actually, I think we did actually have a phone conversation. We did. And as we were emailing and talking, I'm like, okay, something's not quite right here. But then I find out she's in a psych ward. So it was one of those things where I told her, I said, I don't doubt that something could be wrong. However, it is my policy that I can't do this if you are in a psych ward. There's no way that I can do a treatment with you or do a session with you, because obviously you're under the care of someone else. And I told her, call me after, but she had been having a very hard time getting out of the psych ward. And it's like, that's the case where you have to be careful, because again, you don't know. I wasn't right there. It was very hard to tell how much of it was psychological versus spiritual for her at that point. She did have a long history of mental health concerns from what she described, though. So it's like, it's a fine line, but it's just helpful to know that there are energies out there, that there are people out there that are using the energies negatively toward other people. And people don't want to believe that, but that's where you have to be a little bit aware that this stuff can happen. And I think it's in some ways it can be a disservice if you don't at least explore it to some extent, because I think people can be very harmed if number one, if they're not believed, but secondly, if there's really dark energy going on. Now that's where it can take a little bit of a turn, because you, as a professional, you have to be comfortable enough within yourself to know where the boundaries are. And for me, number one, I'm not getting involved with anybody who is actively under psychological treatment to do soul healing. It's not a good idea anyway. But it is that thing where it's like, okay, I don't doubt that it's possible she was having, some sort of experience, but that's where you kind of have to know where your lines are as well. So, thoughts, questions, bogglings, because this can be real stuff. I shared these stories when I did that presentation at the conference a couple months ago. And it was really interesting because about a third of the group was like, yep, we get it. And about another third was like, oh, that's interesting. Never thought about that. And about probably the other third of them were like, oh my God, she's crazy. I don't think she thought I was crazy. I think it was cracking some major seals for them, that they would have never like even fathomed that this could have happened, that was a part of it. But I do think that I actually got really good ratings for that talk. But yeah. So anyway, thoughts, questions, concerns, ponderings, because I felt like it was important to bring this up.
So I just want to interject a little bit here.
Oh, let me find.
I do practice witchcraft, but in not a dark way at
You're
all.
not a dark witch.
Not at all. I believe in the healing powers of
Oh, you locked up, Kim.
modalities, like all of that.
Yep.
But am I still connected?
You're better now.
Oh, okay. But I don't know how many people I've had contact me asking me to do things that I'm like, that's not on my okay list. No. Like they want to hurt someone else. And I'm like, I'm not gonna hurt someone else for you. Um, I have been able to talk with certain clients and let them know that now we can mirror it back to them. So like
Yeah.
whatever they're sending to you, it will just go back. We're not sending anything harmful that
Right.
whatever they're sending.
Yeah, but you're shielding yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But I'm still just like dumbfounded on how many times people are like, "Can you hurt this person for me?" I'm nope, nope, cannot.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing, and I appreciate you saying that, Kim, that I think the unfortunate thing is there are a lot of people that are willing to. And that's the part that I'm concerned about, because it is on the rise big time. And I'm not against Wicca or good witch good witch witchcraft, but it's the dark energies that are, there's enough people out there that are really trying to do harm. And it's uncomfortable, and it's scary. It's just not something that I would encourage anybody to go near. But yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts? Or I know that this could be popping brains open a little bit. Yeah.
I'll just add too. I grew up in a really small rural mountain town, and these are like they're old witches. Like and my mom was a social worker. My dad was a highway patrolman. My brother's now the magistrate of the county. So there's a lot of there's been a lot of interaction with a lot of these people, and very similar stories to you, Kathy. And like when my brother first went out, he pissed somebody off and she squatted behind his car and spat and did all the, and he called my mom freaking out. And so yeah, it does exist. And I think, even in that, the old like hollers, and we don't necessarily think about these older people. But yeah, it continues
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, and I think that's it. It's like everything is energy. Everything is energy. And so this is the thing, is that a lot of people, don't realize that the energy that is involved, it can be tainted and can be warped and can be manipulated in a not so good way. And that's just I'm saying this as sort of a um, service warning that it's just good to know it's out there. You don't have to know how to fix it, but know that it can be out there, and then know who to call if you need to. Because I think it's big stuff. Yeah, Donna?
Knowing who to call. I mean, who's Ghostbusters here?
Yeah, I was
Really?
going to say you can call Kim. Depending on what it is, I can help. There are lots of people. Again, you just have to be discerning. It's like any practitioner that's out there, you just have to be discerning, because a lot of people will say they do certain things, and house clearings and this and that. And it's like you have to be careful with them too. So
Yeah, I assisted with one time. That's all it took. Once. It's not for me.
yeah,
But, and that's not to say that there isn't a place for it. I just don't really understand. I guess the motives are as varied as the motives people have for manipulating other people. But, or does it just all boil down to power or vindictiveness or?
basically, yeah, the power, the greed, the need to control. It can be, like you said, vindictiveness. It can be vengeance. It just depends on how people use it. But not all, like I said, not all witchcraft is like that. It's just that there is an energy, and I'm not just talking about witchcraft. I'm talking about anybody who uses energy badly. But it's unfortunately a thing, and unfortunately, I think it's going to grow. I think it's going to continue to grow. So, that's why I'm kind of bringing it up. Is just it's part of the trend of what's happening right now, and a lot of people's demons are coming out. And I don't mean just like when I say demons, I mean the vengeance, the dark side, that kind of stuff. It's like when I moved to Indiana, I had no idea that the KKK was still a thing. I mean, I'm naive and ignorant. I just thought, oh, that was from years ago. But then I'm going to grad school and hearing about KKK rallies. I'm like, what? This stuff still happens? Well, there's also, um, you know, dark energy kinds of gatherings as well. So,
Yeah.
I can speak to dark energy a little bit just because I have had experience with it. That there are churches that people can go to. I know they're in the Catholic Church. I'm not Catholic, so I don't know a ton about this side of it, but that there are priests that are actually specialize in exorcism or in spiritual negative energies that they can help with that. Of course, Dr. Kelly. There's also some people that are, there's a program in Virginia, Liberty University. There's a guy who used to be a professor at Liberty University. His name's Dr. Appleby.
hmm.
And he does they do prayer service times. So it takes quite a while to get into him, I hear. But it's like a 6 hour where they pray for you over any kind of spiritual or dark entity that you may feel have somehow attached to you. So whether it's through Catholic churches, or there's a church, I believe, in Charlotte called Multiply. I have a lot of friends that are pastors as well. So I have friends that actually that have helped release dark spiritual entities from other people.
Mhm.
But there's a church called Multiply. You can look through Catholic churches through exorcisms, or like I said, there's certain Catholic churches that's what they do. And then with this other, there are other psychologists or other people who also that's what they specialize in. And I've heard that they could spend all day on the emailing people because they see so much of what Dr. Kelly's talking about, that it is becoming so prevalent that it takes months to get in to see them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't want to scare people, but I think it's valid that we talk about this, at least, especially for those of you who are really going to dig into doing more soul healing work, because, or even the therapy work. I mean, I think it's part of knowing, oh, okay, this stuff is real. I may not be the one that specializes in it, but let me know it's real so that I can help this person get to the help that they really need. I mean, it's it's tricky stuff. It's really tricky stuff. There's a person. So one of the metaphysical stores that's here is a witchcraft store, and I just found out, and he's a witch, and he does intuitive work, but I just found out that he is I guess they did it last year for the first year where they had a witch gathering right before Halloween, and they're doing it again this year. And one of my friends said, "Oh yeah, they're going to do this witch gathering. I've already got my outfit." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, let's have a conversation," because she's one of them who has been killed in past lives. And so I'm going to be spending time with her on Friday, and I'm going to have a conversation with her and just basically say, okay, so you realize some of these people are really doing witchcraft, right? I'm going to have this conversation because I want her to protect herself. She's very sensitive to energy, and I think she thinks this is going to be a really fun thing. But no, I'm feeling protective of her in this situation. So
Wait, she's in for a surprise.
yeah, and I'm like I said, I'm going to have this conversation with her just to say, yeah, if you're going to go, just be very protective because these energies are not. There are people there who don't have people's best interests in mind at all. So, yeah, Jen, thank you for sharing your resources too, because I think that's helpful. So, all right, any other thoughts or questions or?
Oh, good session. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Yeah, and if you have any other questions, let me know. But it's important stuff and fun stuff at the same time, except for this stuff. And so, thank you for being active participants in learning about this stuff. So, all right, I know we're a couple minutes over. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I will see you next Tuesday.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.